Hi, everybody. This is your old pal, Uncle Hondo from Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation, Las Vegas Raiders Insider Podcast. It's great to have you here today. We've got a lot to get into. Now, tomorrow we put all of our focus into free agency, and we're going to be talking about free agency today specifically. One issue that isn't free agency, but is, and you'll understand all that in a minute. I want to just very quickly let you know that as this week grows and as we go through free agency, there's going to be so many. They're talking to this guy, they're talking to that guy. There's going to be a ton, and we're going to keep you right on top of it with all the best information, I promise. So just keep it tuned right here to the Las Vegas Raiders Insider Podcast. Keep it tuned, especially to si.com/NFL/Raiders. Going to IG at Hondo SR and X, formerly known as Twitter, at Hondo Carpenter. Now, I'm sure you've already heard the news. Jerry Tillery is being released by the Raiders. That's no surprise. We've talked about that a few weeks ago. This is the second time Tom Telesco has let him go. I want to talk very quickly about Jerry because I like him. But I've also been very blunt that he will make one or two super critical errors a year. And usually they're things that in the heat of emotion or just not thinking a little bit. And everybody loves emotional players, but you look at Max Crosby, but you can't have guys that make detrimental decisions in an air of emotion. That is not what Tom Telesco is looking for. He wants emotion, but he also wants guys that are incredibly controlled. It's controlled emotion, is how I would verse it. Now, I'm grabbing a plane very, very early this morning. I'm in Cabo, but I'm headed back to be there to cover all of free agency. We're going to have a ton. Our entire staff's working hard to bring you the absolute best coverage. A couple of things I want to talk to you about. Just a reminder that tomorrow at noon Eastern begins the legal time when teams can begin to talk to free agents. Now, deals can be negotiated, but nothing can be signed and nothing's binding. So let's say a team talks to the Cowboys and they come to a verbal agreement. But that team at the last second, Antonio Pierce or Tom Telesco picks up the phone and they make a better offer and they take it. It's not binding. The binding period begins on Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 o'clock in Vegas. So those are big things that you need to remember. I want to talk about how I want to word this. I've seen some people making some comments that I don't understand. And like they'll say, we don't want a quarterback out of LSU. Look at Jamarcus Russell. We don't want a lineman out of Alabama. Look at Alex Leatherwood. I get all of that, but those comments are just ignorant. And you have certainly every right to make an opinion, but those are just dumb. That I mean, okay, that's like saying, okay, I don't want a quarterback out of Alabama because there's been a lot of them have failed. But what about Joe Namath? Or, I don't want a whomever out of wherever. That's where players are different and players do better in one culture, not in another. That's where scouting is so vitally important. And I think that one thing I've been telling you all along is they are still uncertain of what they are going to do. I've seen a couple of people, like I haven't seen, but a couple of people email me. The Raiders have already decided they're moving up and getting Jaden Daniels. That's not true. Now, it's also not true that they're not moving up to get Jaden or whomever, because free agency is such a massive, massive impact on the next season. So let me give you an example. Okay. The Raiders want Josh Jacobs back. Okay, Josh wants to be a Raider, but let's say somebody like with Nelson Aguilar and the Patriots comes along and just pays him money that the Raiders are unwilling to pay. So now all of a sudden the Raiders begin to look at, all right, we're going to have to either sign a veteran running back or we're going to go get somebody in the draft. Now, who's available? Who do they go get? All right. So let's say they have plans, and I've already told you they have plans. They want to, I believe that they would like to make a major splash, especially on the defensive line, but depending on how things work out, possibly even the offensive line. But let's assume that something happens and they can't. Okay, now it becomes a bigger issue for the draft. See, the draft, very few times do you know what a team is going to do in early March, at least the good teams. Now, I mean, if they have the number one pick, you already know what's going to essentially happen there or could happen. But I'm checking on a regular basis, and there is no answer because you don't know what holes you have yet. See, Tom Telesco knows the holes he has today on March 10th. He's aware of those holes. But those holes are going to change based on free agency, based on, boy, here's a guy we thought we were going to sign. He ends up going somewhere else. Here's one of our guys we thought we would re-sign. They end up going someplace else. Wow, here's a guy that we didn't think we were going to get that wants to play for Antonio or wants to be in Nevada or whatever reason, wants to be part of this team, wants to play with Devontae. Great. We got him and weren't expecting that. So there's a lot that goes into this. And like someone said to me today from the organization, they laughed and they go, wow, if somebody says we know exactly today what we're doing, I wish I knew, and I'm probably somebody who should know. So I would just encourage everyone, tap the brakes a little bit. There still is pro days where the Raiders are going to go to colleges and watch pro days and watch workouts, in many cases have dinner or at least meet with some of those. I'm going to be going to some pro days, so I'll keep you updated on that. There's a few pro days. Then we're going to begin refining all of our reporting on um, on draft picks as it gets closer and closer, and really narrowing it down. So I would just challenge you as this free agent period begins. You're going to hear a lot of names. Now, let me explain a few things. It is very important to be careful where you get information because there are a lot of agents, and I'm friends with some who I'll give you an example. Okay. Factual story. I knew a guy that was in heavy negotiations with an AFC team, an agent. So he called an NFC general manager of his who had, I think it was three of his clients at the time, and said, hey, can you say this guy's name to me? And the guy said, okay, and gave the name. He goes, great. What was that for? He goes, because I want to be able to say that a AFC team, an NFC team just reached out to me. And boom, it gets reported, AFC team close to signing free agent XYZ, but now an NFC team has called, made the other team up their offer, and the deal got done. So there's a lot of things being played here. So I know this is my fifth year covering free agency with the Raiders, and each time there were, take out the first year, but after the first year, the second, third, and fourth year, I know there were some reports about free agents that the Raiders were not talking to. They weren't lies. Person didn't lie. They were told that, so they did their job. But I would just tap the brakes on everything. You're going to hear a lot. The Raiders are a hot destination right now. There's a lot of people who are intrigued. Now, there's some people that the Raiders just don't want. They don't fit the mold. They don't fit the chemistry. They don't fit the locker room. And I'm going to tell you, AP and I mean this with the ultimate of respect, guards his locker room like a mother hen. And if you don't, have never been on the farm and you don't understand what that means, don't you dare try to make that a criticism. There is nothing more fierce than a mother hen. And so he's very protective of that locker room. And if you didn't see yesterday's podcast, I suggest you go back and listen to it. But he's very protective of that locker room. And so he's only going to bring people in who fit it. I can tell you of a couple people who want to be Raiders that I was told definitively by someone, not a fit. Doesn't mean they're not talented, doesn't mean they're not good. And sometimes fans are like, wait a minute, this guy's good. Okay, good. But what if he costs you? Now, I'm going to tell you a great story. I had this story told to me by a very close friend of mine, an NFC general manager. And he told me the story about the best player at a particular pitch position in the draft, and his team had a huge need. And so we were very close, and it was after the draft or before the draft, actually, several years ago. And I said to him, "You're going to pick him, aren't you?" He goes, "No, don't even want him." I go, "What? Everybody has him projected going to you." He goes, "You're right, and he's going to probably be a Hall of Famer." I go, "Why don't you want him?" Listen to this. He said, "Here's the problem. He's going to go out partying and party all night, show up at the game day, and be amazing because he can do it. But he's a leader. People follow him, even though he's not a good leader. For them, when I say a good leader, meaning for good reasons, he's going to take three of his teammates out with him who aren't going to be able to perform at a high level, and we're going to lose games. He's going to look good, but we're going to lose games." And he goes, "He's not of value to me. I can't help it if you play at a Hall of Fame status, but make three people play poorly." I always thought that was one of the best stories. In fact, I ate with him at the combine, and that story still resonates with me. I found it fascinating. So there, Antonio Pierce is guarding that locker room. There are, I'm just watching on social media as I'm getting all these responses, some people saying to me, "We got to go get this guy. He's great. He'll fit here." Okay. Does he fit the locker room? Now, there were a ton of people that didn't want Jack Jones. Anybody could have had him, but the Raiders took him. Why? Because they knew him, they knew the responsibility, the relationship, and they knew that their locker room could handle Jack Jones. Okay, that doesn't mean every player can be handled. I mentioned yesterday, Randy Moss was with the Raiders and didn't. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't dislike Randy Moss, but would anyone disagree if I said he wasn't spectacular with the Raiders? But then he goes to the Patriots, and I mean, he looked phenomenal. Why? That locker room, that organization, that atmosphere fit him. So don't pigeonhole Antonio Pierce. Don't pigeonhole Tom Telesco. They're going for specific players. Now, again, I want to reiterate, there is a superstar that I'm not predicting is a signing that is preeminent. But I think there's a path to that superstar getting to the Raiders. I think there is some dogs. That means guys who maybe, like, for example, I would call Josh Jacobs a dog. I don't think he's the best running back in the NFL, but I don't think he's a bad one. I think he's great. And I think he's a great player. I think he's an elite player. I think he's a top five player. He's a dog. Okay. So top five player. All right. There are several dogs. Um, and I mentioned yesterday, but I feel it important to mention to you again, the Raiders are going to be frugal, but not cheap. You say, well, can you explain to me what that means? In fact, I've got several emails asking me, so I will. Yes, let's assume that you're really hungry Okay, that's very fair. We're all human. We all want to get hungry and eat. You just want a hamburger. Great. And maybe you decide you want the best hamburger in the world and you decide that's going to come from Shake Shack. Now, I think Shake Shack's really good. They would be a dog to me, but I don't think they would be a superstar, but I think they'd be a dog. But let's say that you want In-N-Out. That's my favorite. So moved to the West Coast and became an In-N-Out addict. Or maybe you like Whataburger. Awesome hamburgers, just like Shake Shack. Okay, so you really like them and you know, okay, this will take care of my hunger. But are you willing to pay $100 per burger? See, you're willing to go pay whatever the cost is on the menu. So you're willing to be buyers, but the price also can't be stupid. And so I expect them to be frugal, meaning they're not going to spend one penny of stupid money. So I expect them to be frugal, but not cheap. They're not going to undercut guys. That is not the way. In fact, I've talked to several players who've had to deal with Tom Telesco in the past. Now, remember, the owners of the Chargers handled contracts a lot, but I've been told by several players Tom Telesco is not cheap. If he wants you, he's willing to pay for you. And he's also willing, though, to tell you what he thinks you're worth. Even though the family would do contracts, he would always, gauge, do you want to come here, whatever. So again, the word is frugal, but not cheap. There is one superstar, which I believe that you could equate, if not the best at their position, and I don't think they are, but I think they're tied. As a matter of fact, at this particular person's position, I think there are three people who you could consider the best. And this person's one of them. And although I do not believe it's imminent, I think there is a path for that person to get here. And let me tell you, Raider Nation would go nuts. I'll explain more after free agency and everything's handled. Um, I'll be glad to tell you who the person was and all of that to break it down for you. So those are the things that you need to be cognizant of. Is not every report is something imminent. Sometimes it's kicking the tires. They're going to have. I remember one time Matt Millen was general manager of the Raiders, and there was a guy who was their second choice. So as soon as free agency came open, I think it was Damian Woody. I may be wrong, but I'm guessing. I know they signed Damian as a free agent, but I think it was Damian Woody. But whoever it was, as soon as the time came that they could make contact, they're at the guy's door. Now, they had other people talking to another person who didn't know they were talking to Damian. Why? Because if it didn't work out with Damian, they wanted this guy to feel like he was the first choice all along. They didn't lie to him, but that was the way it works. So you may hear players getting talked about that totally truthful. The Raiders are interested, but you're a plan B or a plan C guy. Telesco is extremely detail oriented. He's a lot like Dave Ziegler. In fact, personality wise, they're very similar as well. And I know they always had a good relationship, but I'm just telling you, this is how NFL free agency is going to play out. I expect the Raiders to make some splashes, but now as free agency goes, there's going to be that burst, and then there's going to be that feeling out of the market. The other thing you want to remember is this. As free agents go and pieces of the roster begin to fall into place, then you start to get a vision for the draft. So, do I expect the Raiders to sign a veteran quarterback? Yeah. Do I expect the Raiders to draft a quarterback? Yeah. Been telling you that for weeks. And then they'll go into the OTAs, mini camps, maybe even training camp. Aiden O'Connell's one. Everybody's got to beat him out. And so I just want you to make sure that all of this is kind of a primer for free agency coming tomorrow. Get ready. This is Christmas in March. It's just fun. And it's great to see team building. You're going to learn a lot about Tom Telesco. You're going to learn a lot about Antonio Pierce. Guys want to be in the desert. And I'm going to say this to you, Raider Nation. There are the guys like Devontae who grew up a Raider fan that wanted to be a Raider. Okay. But there was a long time, and hear me out, where if the Raiders got a guy, sometimes a lot of times it was either they overpaid or the only team willing to pay, or a guy that like Devontae grew up a Raider. You got guys now that didn't grow up a Raider that you're not going to have to overpay for because they like Nevada having no state income tax and they love AP. This is a place that the Raiders have not been in a very long time. You're there now. This is going to be a new type of free agency for you. And it should be fun. Now, I know everybody wants the big, huge names, but remember the criticism I took last year when Robert Spillane got picked or signed, and I took a ton of criticism for it. You can go back and look at the video, look at the comments. There's some really solid, good football players with Antonio Pierce's type mindset that want to come here, that want to be here. The Raiders are fixing to be better. A week from today, you're going to be talking about the Raiders and how they're improving in the direction that they're going. If you're a Raider fan, you should be like a little kid tonight. Santa's coming tomorrow. And even though you can't sign people till Wednesday, it begins. A lot of great stuff going on. I hope you're having a terrific day. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for tuning in. We are hours away, boys and girls. We are, well, depending on when you're watching it, we are hours, no longer days, no longer weeks. We are hours. Let the games begin. Free agency, Tom Telesco, Antonio Pierce, and the Raiders. Here we go, baby. Talk to y'all later.